time to show up today. We really appreciate it. Today's proposal is a product of a lot of discussion with members around the community. Something that we feel should be strongly considered and discussed with the entirety of the Boise community. So, with that being said, I'll just hand it over to Karen Danley, who I serve as the campaign management manager for. My name is Briggs Jackson, just for the record, but with that being said, I'll just hand it over to her so she can discuss the proposed city amendment.
Thank you, Briggs, and thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it very much. And as Briggs stated, I'm Karen Danley, and I'm running for Boise City Council seat 1. I've been observing, researching, and discussing my forthcoming proposal over the last 20 years. Boise has been growing rapidly and has now reached a size where the current election system does not work well anymore. In our current election system, Boise residents vote for all 6 council members at large. We currently have 5 out of 6 council members from 2 concentrated areas of town that are very close together. This concentration of decision-making power in one area does not accurately reflect the entire community. I'd like you to take a look at this map. So this is all the city of Boise. Of course, this is Garden City and some of Eagle, but this is Boise, and this is where the concentration of power is. And this is 1 council member on the west side. Boise hasn't changed its city election method for over 50 years. The at-large election system is known to work well for cities that are small and homogeneous. However, we are no longer that. We are now much larger and diverse, and our governing structure needs to adapt to that. I'm proposing something that will inherently change how we elect our city council. My goal, and I think it is one we share, is to be fair and equitable. You get the best outcomes when everyone is at the table. What do other cities our size do? When I looked at the list of cities and prioritized by size, Richmond, Virginia, and Garland, Texas were on both sides of us, so very similar populations. 13 wards, which is the same as districts, for Richmond, Virginia, and 8 districts for Garland, Texas. We are at 6 at-large council members. Other places are similar in population. Madison, 20 wards. Salt Lake City, 7 wards. So we are the only one that is currently at large, and the smallest amount, 6 council members. My proposal is to elect 6 council members by districts. The benefits are accountability. With this proposal, each council member has a concrete constituency, and each citizen has an identifiable representative on council. 2, secondly, fair distribution of representation. Districting would bring in leaders from across the entire city limits, from a diverse range of neighborhoods, and provide a much broader representation. 3, candidates, campaigns, and constituency. A districted system would encourage more people to run for office. The campaigns would be more able to effectively use their finite resources, since the city's population would be divided by 6. Constituents would become more engaged and more likely to vote, because their vote will make more of a difference. And the candidate would be closer to home. 4, repair disaffection from government. In our current system, the same group of voters tends to determine the entire city council membership. This creates the perception of winners and losers, which becomes a breeding ground for resentment. This proposal leads a way to restoring trust in our local government. 5, accommodate growth. Boise has been an at-large 6-member council for over 50 years. Boise has grown considerably. Currently, state law prohibits more than 6 council members. This proposal sets out to work with state legislatures to allow for expanding the council. This is not aimed at removing any council member. The goal is to ensure that citizens have an equal representation throughout the city. We have made provisions in the plan to allow current city council members time to adjust to the new system. I believe Boise's best days are ahead of us, but in order for that to happen, we need to tap into the gifts of all our citizens and be the best that we can be. I have asked George Moses to consult with my campaign on this subject because of his almost 50 years of experience in politics and government. George's most recent position was redistricting commissioner for the state of Idaho in 2011.
Almost 50 years and still standing. Karen asked me to go into some of the details of the proposal and some of the ancillary issues that are going to come up. You've got a map in your handout. It's pink and it's weighted to show the voting participation in the city. If that map were a patient and I were a doctor, I'd send it to the ER because that is not a healthy map. You've got large portions of the city that aren't voting. I know by reason of electoral dynamics that we have and by anecdotal evidence, they're not voting because they think it doesn't matter. They think their vote's not gonna make any difference, so they don't bother to show up. That attacks the legitimacy of government. If people don't feel they're invested in it, they don't have much respect for it. That needs to be addressed, and this does that largely by shrinking the pool of people who are involved with each office holder. By doing that, it's possible for a much larger proportion of that electorate to have a direct relationship with their representative. Right now, it's 1 to 250,000. There's a very small pool of people who have a close personal relationship with those people. When it's 1 in 40,000, it's a much different proposition. There are a much larger proportion knows the office holder or knows someone who knows the office holder. That gives them a direct stake, and you'll bring it in. Another way participation is going to be affected by this is by a much smaller universe. You reduce the time and money and effort it takes to run. You're going to enlarge your pool of possible candidates. Are they all going to be good? What a bet. But many of them will be, and there will be some that never would have surfaced had it been as big as you got to run across the whole city and the whole media market. I'm going to move for a second to how these districts get drawn, which is a personal thing of mine. And also, the thorniest part of putting this together is how do you draw the lines in larger part? Who makes the rules? Finding someone with authority and standing to do it is harder than you might think, because almost any elected official will be viewed as having a stake in the game. And if you don't like the map, you'll say he did it just to spite me. I suggested a couple of ideas to Karen, but the one we came up with, I think, is unique in the United States. We're going to ask that the heads of the city's recognized neighborhood associations gather, elect 3 of their number, that's plenty, to draw these maps. And they will draw 6 districts. I'm comfortable that they will respect the lines of the neighborhood associations. I'm comfortable that if they don't respect precinct lines, Phil McGrain's gonna come after them. But the thing about neighborhood associations that makes them so attractive is that they are unpartisan. Nobody runs for president of a neighborhood association as a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't work like that. So these people come to it with a civic outlook. And they have this one job and then they go home and that's great, and we live with that. State law gives the city council ultimate authority of this, but by enacting the proposal that Karen has put forward, that permission is granted. So we kind of like the idea of involving neighborhood associations at this level of government. It actually gives them something other than window dressing to do. There are a couple of issues that are going to get raised that I consider ancillary, but I want to answer them now because they tend to get people's attention. There are those who say this will lead to the balkanization of Boise by dividing it into segments. If that's your concern, I'm sorry to inform you that about 35 horses have already left the barn. That's how many recognized neighborhood associations there are in Boise. each separate, distinct, with no overlap. If we were gonna have that problem, we'd have had it by now. Frankly, you can say that about any electoral division. It's part of what goes on. You're representing disparate interests. Of course there are gonna be differences. But balkanization to the point where it's disabling, I don't see how. We have one city, one government, one city council, one mayor, one whole civic structure. Nobody in District 5 is gonna raise an army and invade District 6. Not gonna happen. The other one is that people come up with the complaint that it will promote horse trading, and frankly, I have a little trouble with this. Of course there's gonna be horse trading. That's what legislatures do. I have an idea, you have an idea, let's get together and make a deal. That's how it happens. Maybe people think that laws happen by immaculate conception. That hasn't been my experience. Lawmakers get together and they exchange their interests, and at the end of it, they come up with something that nobody really likes, but everybody can live with. That's horse trading. Whether people like this often depends on whose horse is getting traded and what they're getting for it. Okay, and you'll find that that varies. Tip O'Neill used to say, "I'm against any deal I'm not in on." And I think some of the people who object to this are in that camp. This is such thin gruel that it's been my experience that often when people raise it, it's a stalking horse for another objection that they have that they don't want to articulate because it's not nice. Usually it's because they like the way the system works for them and they don't want to change it. A perfectly understandable human impulse, not particularly good government, and so it ought to be resisted. That was what you asked me to cover, is that right? Did I leave anything out?
Mm-hmm. So Richard will thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Richard Llewellyn, president of the Northwest Neighborhood Association. And Karen asked me to say a couple of words, just quite briefly, about why I support, as a neighborhood association president, this plan for drawing our city council representatives from districts. And primarily, well, let's step back a second. The neighborhood associations are a great idea. Not all cities have them, and Boise does have them and should be commended for doing so. They've been in existence for about 20 years, I believe. But there are 35 of them, as was just mentioned. And in order for all of these neighborhood associations to really be able to work effectively with the city, people need to have representation early in big city decision-making processes, or not just big ones, small ones that affect your neighborhood more than other neighborhoods. So if we had a district representative from our neighborhoods, then we could be assured that at least there was some communication from our area to the larger city from the beginning. And that would make us be able to work more positively with the city, more effectively with the city, instead of sometimes becoming these confrontations after essentially the decisions have been made. So that's my real reason for supporting this. I think it will leverage and enhance the way that our neighborhoods can work with the city right now. So with those words, I will now turn it over to Bonnie Hardy, the remarkable president of the newly formed South Eisenman Neighborhood Association. Oh, here she is.
Thanks to all that came. Our neighborhood is new, and it's an example of what inadequate representation, overlooked, not recognized as a residential area. We suffered through the R&L trucking terminal that there was no neighborhood meeting. We were considered non-existent. Then we found out we weren't even allowed to vote. So our area on the map is very faintly pink. During that broadcast of no vote, not one city council person called to find out what they could do. I called the mayor directly. He said it wasn't his fault. And then Mike Journey said, we got city services. Well, we didn't. Our fire that we had a year ago was responded to in about 14 minutes, and then they argued who was gonna put it out because one of the fire trucks didn't even have water. So representation, having someone in my corner, our corner of the world, there are 2 neighborhoods in the airport district have been overlooked totally. One of the presentations on the northwest area, when they were trying to zone an industrial area, residential area industrial, their conclusion was, oh, we didn't even know you were there. This type of representation would allow that representative to become acquainted with the neighborhoods, to be a representative. We had to fight every inch for 10 months, 9 meetings, disabled, a disparity group that had to really make efforts to make it to the city council. We had no one to talk to. We had no one in our corner. I approached one of the city council afterwards and I said, would you like this in your neighborhood, these semi trucks? She goes, we don't have any roads big enough to accommodate a semi truck. And I thought, you're not even in touch with the reality of our neighborhood. Not one person had seen our neighborhood. I just kept hearing your light industrial. So we were definitely overlooked, underrepresented, and I feel that this move that Karen is making would have made a difference a year ago for our community, and I heartily support this initiative going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I am open for, I really appreciate Bonnie and Richard and George's support through this, and I'm open for questions. Yes?
I have a question. You're saying there's 35 neighborhood associations and the 37 districts that you're trying to get to have individual?
There's actually 6.
6?
Yep.
Okay, how would the communication between the neighborhood associations work?
So great question. So there would be 3 elected presidents. So that all the presidents of each of the neighborhood associations would elect 3 people to represent them and to be the committee to redistrict to district Boise.
Okay, but redistricting, you still have all these communities that have their individual problems. Would they be getting together as a group on occasion to discuss things? You know, the different neighborhoods together?
Once the districts are in place?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be ideal, right? Absolutely, because you're now a team, right? And you want to really communicate and you have an
Because
identity.
if you can't communicate with them that way, then where does this lead us down in the future? If you cannot communicate within that, is there a possibility we can get change where we can have more on the city council? More people voted in the city council?
Oh, I think that's a really great question, and this is a proposal. Not just 6, and so the reason that I can't move forward with more than 6, and you probably noticed that in the numbers of other cities, is that Idaho has a state law that caps the number of city council on any city. So that would be another step to approach that.
Well, yeah, like in council, which is 600 people, they have 6 people on their committee, on their city council. That's a population of 675 people in this whole city.
Right.
So how do something is way behind the times.
Right, we're 40,000, basically 40,000 people per council member. And most cities our size are between 26 and 36,000, so we are definitely above from these.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that there is a provision in the proposal, it's actually an amendment to city code that I would be proposing that looks into and advocates for increasing the size.
Okay.
Karen, if I can just add,
Sure.
we actually wrote this with an 8-person council. We wanted to expand it without going nuts. And that's when we stumbled over this provisional law that says we can't do it. So we got what we got.
Okay, well, what about that? I'm sure I lost my listening to him, I'm sorry, I'll think about it.
Okay, why don't you think about it, and
So,
then we'll get back.
It is important for us to look at the neighborhoods because in just the last few days, the oil tankers that are in Curtis are, in the proposal is gonna happen to move them out to potentially your neighborhood.
Exactly.
And, you know, they wanna move it out and make a little city dwelling, so, I mean, people in neighborhood associations really do need to have a voice in anything that happens within the city, and especially with those big ticket concerns, which are growth and the environment, the pollutants, and which there's so many, and fiscal responsibility. I mean, those are real important, considerations, and if you are not living in, I don't know what the brown is, I don't know how the color code represents, I think I'm in green myself.
So the color beyond this is District 19 as far as
Oh.
Those are
election, but-
legislative districts.
Okay,
Yeah, but this was the best map, it was
Okay.
more distinct.
yeah,
So all of City of Boise is outlined here in black.
okay.
Okay, so go ahead with
Yeah.
your point.
So, yeah, the idea that, well, I don't even feel like our district representatives are really necessarily, available to communicate with, cause that would be your first step, I guess, is to go to them if you aren't even being heard by the city council.
Okay, using your example, I contacted the gentleman who is kind of running, trying to get people to get that moved, those tankers.
Yeah.
And I questioned him, I said, I'm not being negative about it, I just want to know why you bought in a neighborhood that these tankers have been here for over 50 years.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're complaining about them, and you know what his response was? I like my house.
Okay.
I like the neighborhood, and that was it.
Anyway, the whole point of neighborhood, being able to communicate is real important, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's why they, you know, most cities do have districts, and when we were much smaller, you know, as of a city, then we were more homogeneous, and now we've just grown and there's more diversity and a lot more issues. It's really important to me that somebody really knows the area, has lived there, knows the history, the people, because you choose where you live depending on your priorities, and that's gonna make a difference in city council and be expressed there.
I did think of that other question,
Uh-huh.
which I don't know if this is off base. Why is there only monthly meetings of the city council for a city this size? Because you can't possibly accomplish all that needs to be done expediently.
There's actually weekly meetings.
Oh, there are.
Mhm.
Because we
On
were told
Tuesday.
only once a month
Yeah,
you could do
that's
that.
what I was told.
No, yeah, they're weekly meetings.
Okay,
That sounds more reasonable.
Mhm.
yes, definitely.
Yep. Do you have a question, Haley?
Yeah, so to me, it seems like the obvious argument against this is that in the current setup, every council member is accountable to everyone in the city.
Mhm.
What would be your argument against that, I guess?
Well,
Well, I don't think that, I think my argument against that is these people in this area might think that, but there's a real sense of disenfranchisement outside of that area. It's feeling like they're not included, that they don't have a seat at the table. It's easy for these people or this area to say, you know, yes, I represent everybody. However, that's a dramatic view of that would be like me saying, yes, I understand what it's like to be a refugee. I mean, you do not understand what it's like, because you chose to live here. I could have chose to live in the North End, but I had different priorities for the kind of land I wanted and the location. I had the same amount of money I could have bought there, but I chose to move actually at that time on the bench. So the reason there's districts too is because you want to engage everybody and have someone from your local area that you know. So then people are more likely to become involved. And as the map in the paper shows, it really depends on the voter turnout. And this is why other cities do districts. Voter turnout is dependent on education, on the time that they have, the kind of a job that they have. As a teacher, I could barely keep up with politics because my heart and soul and my time was put into teaching, you know. So you have all different kinds of people that don't live in this area, that's really the most affluent and expensive area. Yes,
I didn't introduce myself by experience when I spoke. I worked for the Congress for 6 years. I've been in political campaigns from school board to president. I've been with winners and losers. Winning is better. To go to your question, it's been brought up to me by more than one person that when you live in Boise, there is nobody who is your council member. There is your congressman, there is your legislator, but there is not a your council member, and that breeds a certain disaffection. It creates a distance that's unhealthy. Now, when the city's 50,000 people, fine, everybody knows everybody and everybody thinks pretty much the same way. That's not us anymore. And so people, many people, and as you get away from that cluster, it's more and more, feel disenfranchised. They don't, those people talk to those people and they're not me. You solve that by bringing the representation close enough and to make them identify with individuals. So it's no longer an impersonal, the council, which is what you get when it's at large. It's the very personal, my representative.
I think another thing to consider when that comment comes is what's the source? Where do they currently live? Because if you live in this area, you're gonna probably be more likely to be fine with the current system. And you're going to promote a system that keeps you in power. However, if you're outside of that area, you're not part of that system, you don't feel part of that system. You don't know those people.
Question over here.
So for instance, we're having a real problem with the water up on the bench. And the only reason that it's really getting any attention is because, thankfully, we have a state representative that's having problems with his water, because he lives there. So now there's attention to it. So he's sort of like our leader in that, in this situation. But other than that, we would have just been, flailing around ignorant and, knowing that we have brown water and that our water tastes terrible and that we're all buying water and our toilets are erupting and all kinds of fun things. But, so thankfully, because of Gammon, we have attention. And that should be the councilman's job, but he's sick of his own toilets erupting and stuff, so.
Well, you don't have a councilman from there.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
That
We would
exist.
have no one if we didn't have Gannon. It isn't really his job, I mean, per se.
And I venture to guess that if that was happening to somebody in this area, that it would be brought to city council and say something needs to happen.
Right.
Yes.
The representation is so important because when I reached out and I sent everybody a letter about us not having city voting rights, the only response I got was not one person from the city. I had to call the mayor myself after they received emails. Not one even emailed me back. So who did I hear from? Phil McGreen answered. Diana Luciano, is that
Not Janda.
she called me, and Phil actually came out to our neighborhood and walked the streets with me, that he wasn't involved in that type of thing, just to get a feel for the community. He came and gave a presentation, explained what happened, how it won't happen again, and reassured us. But not one representative from the city. They said it wasn't their problem. And to me, we are left out because we aren't an affluent neighborhood. So being able to elect our own official for our district, our area, would be astronomical, because now we're gonna have a voice, because everyone is gonna be registered, and we're gonna be voting over at Micron this year. And so hopefully we're gonna be a bright pink next year.
That's right. And I think that's the point, Haley, the answer to your question is these people outside of this area do not feel that representation is happening.
In response to your question, I would just say that optics matter. And look at the map. And in addition to optics matter, I think actions speak louder than words. And that those of us that aren't living there, that are living in other places, do not feel like decisions are being made with our best interest in mind. We don't feel that way. And so something really needs to change. So I really applaud the initiative. It's a great step in the right direction.
Yes. Thank you. Yes?
How would you, going back to the creation of districts, how would you go about that? It seems like it's based on the state model to a certain extent. How do you balance the populations?
You, in redistricting, the data you use, almost everybody uses it because it's the best there is, it's federal census data.
Right.
That's broken out by census tract.
Right.
That's small. The rule is, it's in the statute, it's in Karen's proposal, that you balance the population as closely as you possibly can. And so you do it by moving these pieces around on the board, respecting local boundaries, respecting local features, until you get a map, and it'll never be perfect, but it's balanced by population, and it contains communities of interest as much as it's possible to do that. But the basic building block is the census tract.
Right.
What happens after that is that Phil McGrain takes these census tracts and builds precincts. This has a waiting period for that to happen so that those precincts are in place before these districts are drawn, so that you don't cut through a precinct with the district line if you can avoid it. That's nasty for electoral administration. That's essentially it. You sit down with a map and the census tract numbers, and you start with what would I like to do, and then you work down to what can I do.
So where would the neighborhood, it sounds to me that the proposal is similar to what I understand the state does with the commission.
It's not dissimilar. There are only a few models for this, and it's important, okay, but this is a small project. You don't want to get into something as baroque as what California has, which, God love them, it works, but it takes forever to put together. This is a one-time thing for 6 districts.
And I think
So
too.
where does the neighborhood commission, or getting the 3 neighborhoods to, how's that fitting into it? I understand what you're saying. I've got a background in GIS, so I understand that.
Okay, yeah.
But where do as I understood, the 3 neighborhoods fit into this?
All of the neighborhood association heads elect these 3. That's the constituency. So every neighborhood association comes to the table. They select 3 delegates to go off and make the map.
So it's similar to the state having the 6 people.
Sort of. The constituencies divide up differently, but yeah, it's the same dynamic.
Okay.
So how do they guarantee that those 3 people that they pick aren't in a cluster geographically?
If you want guarantees, rob a bank. You rely on the judgment, and this is what representative government is. You rely on the judgment of those 35 neighborhood association heads to come up with a group, more than anything else, whose integrity they have faith in. Because you're gonna trust these people to do this. There are no guarantees, except that you're gonna get a map at the end of it. I think you can guarantee that. But you're gonna rely on their judgment. We pick people from a milieu where we hope their primary drivers are in the neighborhood interest. They're not running for anything, at least not yet. And at the end of this, they go home. That's it, they're done. So they don't have a continuing interest other than they want a good map. And they answer to their fellows in the neighborhood association world and to the associations. I mean, they don't want to go back and hear a bunch of people yelling they screwed it up.
This would be a crucial time when you pick those 3 people that people do their research and really get to know the area, the other presidents, and do pick them wisely and consider the geographical, variety of people that you pick on that board. And, you know, I'm trying to offer a seat at the table, so people are gonna need to come to the table and meet us there.
Are you communicating with the neighborhood associations? How are you, getting this idea out to them?
Well, today's the beginning,
Okay.
and we will, move it on from here, and definitely take the show on the road, basically.
Good.
And I'm with a neighborhood association, she's a neighborhood association, Richard's a neighborhood association.
Oh, great. And my neighborhood votes a lot, and I don't think they're here, but anyway.
Which
Karen.
neighborhood is yours?
The Sunset, and
Okay, great,
Sunset
great.
and Hollister
Yeah, great.
area. I don't like between the two of them.
Yeah.
We love your signs, your
Yeah.
neighborhood signs.
Yeah.
We just love your signs.
Haley?
What about the parts of the city, and it's not huge portions of the city, I'll be the first to admit, but there are parts of the city that don't have a neighborhood or a neighborhood association at all. How does that play into this?
That's a really good question that I wasn't aware of that, and I haven't taken that into consideration, so this is part of starting the process, we would adjust to be sure that they're included, because the whole point of this is to include everybody so that we have a better better system, a better process.
When we set this up, we knew that the coverage wasn't 100% with the neighborhood association, but it was the best tool at hand. And nothing stops any neighborhood from forming a neighborhood association. This is highly likely to be a spur to some of these to form. That's fine. If that's one of the consequences of this, that's good.
On the neighborhood association thing, again, having experienced it myself, when we were annexed in 2014, no one knew about a neighborhood association, and I told the council, I said, we missed that welcome wagon. And when I called them to say, hey, I wanna form a neighborhood association, there was kickback on that also, saying you're not a neighborhood, you're industrial. And so the very zoning that the city changed, progressed from agricultural to light industrial, was all because of the airport district. Knowing that, I question whether the other neighborhoods even know such a thing exists, because until they have a problem where they have to present to the city council and they have 3 minutes to do it, you don't look into it. And, you know, it's kind of like they're probably busy in their lives. So my question is this: the city, with their annexation, going rapid, they need to bring awareness of the opportunity to form a neighborhood association, because that is not being done. It's being overlooked. And I feel that the only way you find out about it is when you're before the city council and they say, time's up. And you have nowhere to go, and then you have to fight to get an association. So the city has to take responsibility for that. Notifying neighborhoods, sending out representatives so that their entire city limits does have a neighborhood association.
There's been some improvement on that front. The city's website now has fairly prominently displayed a neighborhood association toolkit. You know, everything you need to know about forming an association, where they are, and all that
But
stuff.
we don't usually go there and look for that, like,
If I'm gonna do something with the city, that's probably the first place I'd go.
well, yeah, but it's brought to your attention when there's some engagement with the city.
Yeah.
Whereas I think they need to be formed and healthy in a group before that knee-jerk reaction.
No argument there. That's kinda not what we're here about, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it kind of tills in.
Well, it's a method of annexation, and part of that is following up with some kind of welcoming, and this is part of welcome to our city, and we would like you, here's some opportunities here, here's the tools to do that.
Right.
I'm sure you would have taken advantage of that. Erica?
Well, and by districting, then someone would feel some responsibility to go out to those untouched areas and reach out to them. Right now, sounds like there's no incentive for the ones who are there to go out to those untouched areas. So it would put an onus on someone to be that welcome wagon and say, do you want to be included, do you wanna be a neighborhood association? And then I'm just gonna say I support this because at the state level, we do this on the big end. At the fire district level, we do this on the other end of the bookend. Fire districts have 3 sub-districts that they elect people to represent in the fire district. But we've got this hole in the middle with the city council that isn't doing this. So to me, it's logical.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, I have 3 people and not 4. And the reason I ask is the state, George, correct me if I'm wrong, the state has 6 members, which forces some horse trading and more further things.
It also is a recipe for gridlock. I was on the council that didn't get a map, because there were 2 members, and I will not name names, but if you followed it, you know what I'm talking about, simply weren't going to have a map that wasn't gerrymandered. And there were some of us who weren't going to have a map that was. And since there were 6 of us, there wasn't a lot we could do. I've spoken with some of the people who drafted that. Their heavily misguided thought was that the commission would deadlock and the courts would draw the lines. The courts don't want to do it. They really don't want to do it. And when this one went to the state Supreme Court, they formed another commission. So 3 is necessary for smooth function. You gotta have a tiebreaker in there somewhere. You don't need a cast of thousands. If I could have done it with less than 3, I would. This is 6 lines, okay? In a very small confined area. But the odd number is to force a decision. That's really basically it. It was the smallest, most efficient package we could come up with.
So efficiency is part of it, and I think maybe what you're looking at is representation, so that it's more people at the table. Is that right?
That comes in when they elect them.
Yeah, I'm thinking more on the state level.
Oh, okay.
And I realize there's been problems there.
Yeah.
Because I don't favor gerrymandering type thing.
Well, the
I
problems are gonna
understand
continue.
what politicians do. So that's fine.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
First question, you may have covered this, what is the next step to this? If you are elected to city council, I can't imagine the other city council members wanting to bring us before them. So if they are not willing to do that, is it possible that like some sort of citizens initiative can be, done to get Boise, vote on this?
Well, thank you for asking the question and answering it at the same time. Because that's exactly it. When I'm elected, I will take this to city council and propose this to them. And what's going to make a difference, how receptive they are to it, is that neighborhoods from all around Boise, that map changes. That, that we don't have representation, that we have stronger voter turnout in these other areas. Because that will show that people are interested in what one of my top platforms is to have equal benefits and services, and the way to assure that is to have equal representation on city council. So that's part of it, and if that doesn't, if people aren't willing to take a really good look at that, which I think is really fair and equitable, then they may take an initiative, a referendum.
So when it's on the agenda, we will all come. And that will be really important, that people
Yes.
come and talk about it and stuff, yeah.
We're gonna need to engage people who have not been engaged in City Hall very often or ever before, to help them get, find their voice and feel that they can make a difference. I mean, hopefully people will see that they will, that this will be more beneficial for the entire city. It's a win-win situation. Because if you don't have those people at the table, you're going to come up with a conclusion, and then it actually takes more time and money and energy for on a whole for people to come, because you have all these people fighting it, whether it be whatever issue F-35 is the main library, but, so we're looking at the process and how are we processing, the issue at hand, and can we have a better process to come up with a better product at the end? Yes.
So where would you say you are in the process right now? In terms of, figuring out how this would work, exactly how it's done, et cetera?
Well, today is the combination of research and George drafted the ordinance in a manner that it's simply that I can take it to city council when that time comes. So it's set to go. He's had it vetted, and he has experience doing this. So that's why I called on his assistance. So we're ready to do that. So but also I want to make sure everyone's included, that we walk our talk, and the whole point is to have everyone included. So and this is the start of the process of talking about this and getting this idea out there. But we're ready to go. It could have happened yesterday if I was in city council today.
It's a discussion draft. It's informed to go. It's got enough in it to go. But the dough is there, but it hasn't been baked yet. That's kind of where we are with it.
I have a quick question. I'm Tanya from Southwest Ada County Alliance, and I thought I had a grasp on this, but now I think I have a disconnect. I was under the assumption that we would take all the neighborhood associations, okay, and then we would divide them into 6 categories or 6 districts, okay, and then we would have council members for each district. But then you brought up the thing of having 3 people elected from all the neighborhood associations. So is it? I guess I don't understand.
There are layers here. You've blended a couple.
Okay.
The first layer is neighborhood. Now, it isn't neighborhood associations going to be combined to create the 6 districts. It's the entire city population.
Okay.
This job is assigned to the neighborhood association world. The heads of those associations elect 3 of their number. They draw the lines. They go home.
Okay.
They're done. What's left is 6 legislative districts, each of which will elect 1 councilman.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you. Great questions. Any other questions?
The hardest part of this is what you said about getting people to come. People you're gonna be talking to know it's pointless. They know it won't make any difference. And so they know it's a waste of their time to show up. Your work is to get over that and get them to show up. The reason that I'm confident, and I'm not a big guy for municipal politics, to say the truth, but this is a kind of a fundamental change. It's of a scale that should command people's attention. It's bigger than a fire station. We had this discussion yesterday. Issues come and go. The process is permanent. It's gonna be there for generations. The last one was there for 50 years that we know about, maybe longer. It isn't often that you get a bite at the apple this size.
Dick?
Well, I fully support this proposal. I'm Dave Kangas. I'm from the Vista Neighborhood Association and Boise working together. And you will get big kickback from the North End power structure because they've been in power for decades. And the amount of spending that is done in downtown represents that. And the voter turnout. Boise is far more than the North End and north of the river. They have a whole different perspective of the issues than you do once you get out onto the bench and deal with traffic and growth. The North End doesn't feel it. It's built out pretty much. I mean, yeah, there's more building going on, but nothing like the rest of the city is experiencing. And it has to change, and this is the first step. Voter turnout sucks for Greater Boise. And that totally represents where the spending goes, because if you're a politician and you're getting elected by the North End, who are you gonna serve? You're gonna put most of your efforts down there to make it happen.
So, one question that I have that relates to that is people have had the housing and the development issue in all parts, not just in the North End, and that has really raised the hackles on many people in other areas besides that central area. So when I was out canvassing, one person that in the Highland area actually brought up the idea of this redistricting so that they're represented. And, you know, when you think about who's been successful versus not successful in getting the zoning not changed to adjust to the developer's desires, you think about how many people have crowded the rooms and how many times they've had to meet to actually satisfy the ire of the people. Actually, there's a lot of people outside that central area that have many concerns that have recently been brought to the table with planning and zoning and the council. So maybe we're changing a little bit and getting out of that power structure. I actually worked at a school that was really attacked by that North End Neighborhood Association because of the way the design of the school was going, and they wanted it to be their way, and they were successful in delaying the school being built by 8 months. I mean, they really.
A Boise school?
A Boise school.
Wow.
So, yeah, so they have a voice, but now that so much is going on outside that area, I think a lot of people may respond positively to something else.
Agreed, it's a chicken and the egg to some extent, and hopefully people become more involved, and we can make this change, and we can keep, you know, working towards something that is fair and equitable for everyone. And yes, it's difficult, it's challenging for some people to relinquish power and see that fairness and that and to be equitable. But I wouldn't clump everyone together. There are people who definitely are proponents of districting in all areas. But it is likely and very common when you're in power to promote and advocate for a structure that will keep you in power.
A very wise old government bureaucrat, not our government, gave me a bit of knowledge that I carried with me. Power is never given. It is always taken. And there aren't many absolutes in life, but that comes pretty close. If this weren't important, I never would have put a tie on this morning, so.
Yes.
All right, talking about the turnout, the map here is showing 43% for where the 3 council people are close in on that map.
Right here, or here?
Right there, where you're
Okay.
right now. That precinct has a 43% turnout. So you've got 3, half the council is there.
And
That's
so
not
you
coincidental.
have people running for council from that area, which helps, but if we had small districts, you know, people with more moderate means could actually run and reach every person. Where if you're trying to reach 240,000 people, it takes a lot of money, and I understand the nature of elections and campaigns. Well, I do more now than ever, but if we had that smaller, then more people would hopefully run because they can see every vote's going to make more of a difference, and that they can do it with a more moderate campaign fund.
A little bit of electoral mechanics. When you're sitting down to design a campaign, the first question, where do I start? Where's my constituent? Who can I count on? These folks have built-in cadres of people who are used to participating. They start off a step ahead. And it's not unfair, it's just, that's the way it is. If I'm designing somebody's campaign, I'm not designing Karen's, thank God. My first question is, where's your support? What's gonna make your campaign run? These folks have it built in. These folks haven't done it in memory. If you're gonna change that pink map, that's how it's gotta happen.
So it's more important now than ever to unite and for us to vote, to make a difference here. Any other questions? David, do you have any questions?
Maybe, whatever you propose, I'm for it.
Oh, did you get that on video?
You're buying lunch.
I'm going for ice cream
No,
after
I'm
this.
sorry I'm late. There was, just commenting is, earlier this year, there was some comments on it on Facebook and stuff. I believe Boise Bench Dwellers, I'd mentioned it a couple times. I was just surprised at the kickback. That, people were protected, not wanting it. Well, we represent all of Boise, and it came from the council.
Oh, absolutely.
Wait a minute, we represent all of Boise, but, it's just not the same. If you live in the north end, you have no idea what it's like to live out in southwest Boise. Okay, it's night and day difference. It's not the same Boise. It just isn't. The impacts out there are far greater than what you'll feel down there.
There's a built-in conflict with this, and it can't be helped because it's changed. It's important, and we've emphasized this every time we talk. This isn't pointed at anybody. This isn't designed to get anybody. It's designed to improve the governance of the city, and that's in everybody's interest. Karen will get some votes in here because there are people who are motivated by fairness. And they can see, this ain't right. That pink map you have ain't right. And it'll bother them. Will we get a majority? Highly unlikely. But they're there, and we're not out to get them. If we were, I wouldn't be in this.
Right, it's nothing personal, it's about creating a system that's more fair.
Yes, you wanted to mention about the candidate forum on Wednesday,
Pardon?
the city council candidate.
Oh, yes, so there's a city council candidate forum at South Junior High on Wednesday at 6:30. And all that? Yes, David?
I apologize for coming in late. The only experience I have with districts other than the legislative district in this area is ACHD.
Right.
So how has the district arrangement with ACHD improved or failed to improve responsiveness to certain sectors of the city?
I am so glad you asked that question. Number one, ACHD is an anomaly in the whole entire state. If it was a perfect system to have ACHD, other cities would have done it somewhere. It is an anomaly. It's also, so it doesn't, it's set up, it's difficult for all leaders at that table to be successful, because you have a county system in charge of 6 cities' roads, and they have to divide that up between those 6 cities. Now, it's also county, and that is even a lot. If you think this is diverse, it's even more diverse as you get into the county. So I'm on 2 county boards, and I do ride horses, and it's even more diverse outside of Boise than it is within Boise. So that's very difficult. You're gonna have and then the other, so this is not the county, this is a city, and this is not about transportation. This is about the city issues.
But it is about district organization versus at-large and improving responsiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only analogy I have is the ACHD structure. We're not talking transportation, we're talking responsiveness of candidate to geographic areas.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're telling me is maybe in the case of ACHD, it doesn't work that well either to have districts.
Can I take a whack at this?
Sure, go for it.
The system that ACHD uses is the same system the county uses. They are regional representatives elected at large. How many of you know the name of your county board member? How many of you know the name of your ACHD member? That's what's wrong with at-large representation. It's impersonal. This is direct. You vote for your representative. If you elect these, this is my chance. Let's say
He's glad you asked the question.
that somebody is running in District 5. There are 4 candidates running in District 5, okay? Candidate A gets 42% of the vote. Candidate B gets 38% of the vote. Candidate C gets 20%, and candidate 4 gets the rest. But if you only count the votes in 17, in District 5, candidate A gets 45% of the vote, candidate B gets 30% of the vote, candidate C gets 18%, and the other guy gets the rest. So you have elected to represent District 5 someone who was not voted for by a majority of the people in District 5. That is an abomination. Any system that allows that to happen ought to be thrown out. Thank you.
I look at it, from being involved on the bench for so long, that this is the first election in my memory where people are actually reaching out to the bench and the northwest areas. Mayor Beater hasn't been out in the last 3 elections. Elaine Clay hasn't been out. They just don't, no reason to. There's no vote out there. So they concentrate on where the votes are at. I know my district representatives, state representatives very well. I happen to know Jim Hansen pretty well too. I think it makes a big difference, but you do bring up a good point that when you're at large elections, it's not the same.
You're asking the entire city to pick your representative.
Yeah.
If you're good with that, fine.
Any other questions?
It's time.
It's time, the time
We're
is
making up
So we're happy to take this on the road, go to your neighborhood associations and explain it, take our map and really invigorate voting in all